Right, Potter fans, I'm sure we can all agree there are some pretty unpleasant people in the Harry Potter series. However, given the nature and the plot of the 7 stories, most of these characters eventually end up being linked back to Lord Voldemort being the ultimate head of all evil. But I've decided that today is the day we're going to give some credit, if you can even call it that, to some of the other horrible people littered throughout this series, ranging all the way from absolutely terrible to somewhere in the middle to even your really blurred characters. Let's highlight some of the worst of the worst. So in typical Zogwarts style, we're going to go through all 7 Harry Potter books, starting from the Philosopher's Stone right to the Deathly Hallows, and in each book I'm going to pick out who I think the most evil character in that particular book is. And to make this list more interesting, I've got 2 rules. Number 1, no character can appear more than once in this list, so we're going to get 7 different characters for the 7 different books. And number 2, I'm never allowed to include Lord Voldemort throughout this list because, as I said before, I want to focus on some different characters for a change. So if you're new, please do hit subscribe. We're still on our road to 2,000 subscribers, and check out my TikTok, link in the description, for daily Harry Potter content. But without further ado, let's get things started with the Philosopher's Stone, Vernon Dursley. So in the inaugural Harry Potter book, there are really 2 villains. Lord Voldemort, who I can't include because of the rules of this list, and Professor Quirrell. And whilst Quirrell is kind of the obvious answer here, I'm not sure he fits the bill of actually being evil. You see, Quirrell was just this kind of nervy, a little bit pathetic teacher at Hogwarts who went off on an expedition and bumped into Lord Voldemort. And at that point, Quirrell was just too weak, both mentally and regarding magical ability, and even Voldemort in his non-human form was able to conquer Quirrell, take over his body, and basically then make Quirrell do everything that happens in the Philosopher's Stone book. So I don't think I'd actually regard him as evil, it's more that he's just weak and can't actually stand up for himself. The Dursleys, on the other hand, are evil. And no, they're not evil in the typical Harry Potter way. They're not Death Eaters or anything. They're just despicable people. The way the Dursleys treat Harry throughout his upbringing is genuinely disgusting, and we see the first glimpses of it here in the beginning of the Philosopher's Stone. In terms of narrowing them down then and choosing the worst, I'm not going to pin this on Dudley because I actually think he's almost as much of a victim of this as Harry. Whilst Dudley's childhood might seem nice, getting loads of food and loads of presents, it's actually just creating a terrible human being as well, and he's being completely manipulated and doesn't even realise it. So whilst he is horrible to Harry, I'm not going to class him as evil because he's also a victim here. And then you're choosing out of Petunia and Vernon, and I've always got the impression that Vernon is actually the more horrible one. I don't think Aunt Petunia likes Harry at all, but I think her choice would almost be to just ignore him, whereas I think Vernon gets actual pleasure out of making Harry's life unpleasant. Hence why I'm going for him as the most evil character in book number 1. For the Chamber of Secrets, I've gone for Lucius Malfoy. Okay, quite a quick one this, because again, the final villain is a memory of Lord Voldemort, and we can't pick Voldemort in this list. The only other argument for a character you could make is Ginny Weasley, because she does the evil act of opening the Chamber of Secrets, but as we all know, she's being possessed by Lord Voldemort, so this isn't on her. She's not actually meaning to do anything evil. She's not an evil character. She can't control her actions. Lucius Malfoy, on the other hand, absolutely can. And towards the beginning of the book, he decides to slip the diary in with Ginny Weasley so she will take it into Hogwarts, essentially for 2 reasons. Number 1, he believes the Ministry are going to raid his house looking for dangerous and mysterious objects, and he doesn't want them to find it. And number 2, he'd love something bad to happen relating with the diary, and if it happens with Mr. Weasley's daughter, it could get Mr. Weasley into trouble at work. These are Lucius Malfoy's motives for sending a diary into Hogwarts that he knows has the power to open the Chamber of Secrets, which he also knows was responsible for the death of a Hogwarts student. So ultimately, to get himself out of a little bit of trouble and to try and get his co-worker into a bit of trouble, Lucius Malfoy is happy to risk the lives of pretty much every student at the school. He is an evil person. For the Prisoner of Azkaban, I've gone for Aunt Marge. So as you can see, there's a bit of a theme with the early Harry Potter books, specifically before Lord Voldemort truly returns, because it's kind of hard to find the outright villains of each story. It's just filled with characters either being controlled by Lord Voldemort or Lord Voldemort's memory, etc. And Prisoner of Azkaban is kind of now the opposite, but also a little bit the same. I mean, there's no out-and-out villain, but there's also just no Voldemort in this story either. Technically, the final reveal of this story is that Peter Pettigrew is the evil one who betrayed Harry's parents, but he doesn't really do anything evil in particular in this book. I did also look at Lucius and Draco Malfoy for what they tried to do to Buckbeak and Hagrid, but I didn't want to count Draco for this because I feel like this was more Lucius Malfoy leading the charge to get Buckbeak executed, and I've already used Lucius in this list. That's when it hit me. The worst person in this book by a mile is Aunt Marge. Now, I could sit here and read lines of stuff she said, but all I'm going to say is at one point during the beginning of this book, when Aunt Marge visits the Dursleys, she expresses the fact that she is pleased that Harry is hit with a cane at his school. For those who haven't actually read or watched Harry Potter, Harry isn't actually hit with a cane. It's just a lie that the Dursleys are feeding because they don't want Aunt Marge to know that he goes to a magical school. Anyway, back to my point. Not only is she happy by the idea he's being hit by a cane, she's then frustrated because she doesn't think it's affected him enough. She doesn't think he seems scarred, no pun intended, by the experience. I mean, just that alone should indicate that this woman is pure evil. For the Goblet of Fire, I've gone for Barty Crouch Jr. Okay, this one was probably a little bit more obvious. Now, you could definitely make an argument for Peter Pettigrew because he actually murders Cedric Diggory. But I think if you're weighing up everything that happens in the book, it just is Barty Crouch Jr. I mean, essentially, he spends an entire year hoodwinking everybody in order to allow the Dark Lord to return. And he's doing this whilst knowingly sending Harry to his death at the end of the maze. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Barty Crouch Jr. is one of the most competent, if not the most competent people on this list. He is a brilliant villain. I've spoken about this before on the channel many, many times. But if anyone's biggest intention is to bring Lord Voldemort back to power and lead an underage wizard to their death, they're pretty safe on an evil list. For the Order of the Phoenix, I've gone for Dolores Umbridge. Do you know what? I'm not going to bother wasting anybody's time explaining this one. Let's move on. For the Half-Blood Prince, I've gone for Fenrir Greyback. Okay, back to the more interesting ones now. Half-Blood Prince was a difficult one to choose because the big ending of the Half-Blood Prince is that Dumbledore is killed, but as we later go on to find out, this was all a manipulated plan. So even though people at the time reading the book without knowing what was going to happen would have definitely said Severus Snape was the most evil character in this book for killing Dumbledore, we now know that it was the complete opposite. So who actually was it? I mean, again, you could point towards Draco Malfoy because Draco Malfoy spends the entire year trying to allow the Death Eaters to enter the castle and planning to kill Albus Dumbledore himself. But I think we can all agree Draco doesn't actually want to do that. He is just terrified for his life, and we see in the end he was never really going to kill Dumbledore. He didn't have it in him. Now, if I was allowed to include Voldemort, I think it's a very good shout for him for this reason. He essentially just ruined Draco's life and prolonged what I guess he was always envisaging was going to be an execution. He was planning Draco to fail, but wanted to make him and his family suffer before he presumably planned on killing Draco for not killing Dumbledore. That is pretty evil. But since I can't include Voldemort, I've decided to look for another character, and I think a great option is Fenrir Greyback. Not only does Greyback fatally injure Bill Weasley, which is pretty despicable in itself, it's more what we find out about Fenrir Greyback from Lupin and the fact that himself and other werewolves have joined Lord Voldemort. And one of their big reasons for doing so is because they've been promised victims. These victims including younger children for them to bite. I mean, it's just the epitome of evil, is it not? So yeah, this one took a little bit more thinking to try and decide which route I wanted to go down, but the more I looked at it, it has to be Greyback. And for the Deathly Hallows, I've gone with Bellatrix Lestrange. Now, most people would have probably guessed that this woman will pop up somewhere on this list and were probably surprised to have not heard her name by now. Now, obviously, I didn't really explain my Order of the Phoenix point properly because I was doing a bit, but if there'd been anyone who could have been up against Umbridge for the most evil character in Order, it probably would have been Bellatrix Lestrange, especially with what happened with Sirius at the Ministry. But I tried to play it tactically. I knew that I had the Deathly Hallows coming up. I knew that Umbridge was absolutely despicable, so I could happily go with her for my Order of the Phoenix pick and bank Bellatrix Lestrange for this one. Because again, if you can't pick Voldemort, and basically he is the catalyst for everything that's going on in this book, including the war which leads to so many deaths, You kind of just have to pick one of his biggest followers who was responsible for loads of the deaths and loads of the stuff that happens around it. And that person is Bellatrix Lestrange. Of course, the torture with her and Hermione and Malfoy Manor is absolutely disgusting, and we can only guess because we don't follow her around too much, but I would assume she was responsible for multiple of the 50 odd deaths that occurred to innocent people at the Battle of Hogwarts. I'm also going to throw out a little bit of a disturbing one. We go on to find out in The Cursed Child that Bellatrix was pregnant with Voldemort's kid, so at some point during this book, she procreated with Voldemort. And without going into loads of detail, I'm just going to say, I think that sounds pretty evil. I mean, imagine looking at the Dark Lord and deciding, hey, do you know what? I'm going to make another one of you. Yeah, it's not even a debate for me. Bellatrix Lestrange takes this one. And that's my list. I hope you've all enjoyed. It was a little bit of a shorter one this time round. It's been a really busy few weeks, but I am going to look to make more consistent videos and longer videos going forward, with a few shorter ones mixed in here and there just to keep the consistency of the channel as well as I can. Please do hit subscribe if you enjoyed, and let me know if you agree or disagree with my points in the comments, and I'll hopefully see you all next time. Goodbye.